Since when do animals like you get to touch a piano?
Garrett Whitfield, 58, billionaire, asked that question to a janitor. At his own gala,
Tell you what.
Champagne. Byron Bennett, 34, black, stood there in a faded gray.
Play one song on that piano, and I'll marry you to my daughter.
Byron looked at him, quiet.
And if I can?
Garrett's grin disappeared for half a second. Then he laughed harder.
Boy!
The room howled. Garrett flicked a 50 at Byron's feet like tossing a treat to a dog.
Pick it up.
Byron didn't pick it up. Nobody in that room was ready for what those hands were about to do. But to understand what happened that night, and why those 4 notes changed everything, we need to go back. 6 months before the gala, before the dare, before the $50 bill. Back to a man no one ever looked at twice. Byron Bennett's alarm didn't buzz. It never had to. Every morning at 4:45, the Red Line train shook the walls of his studio apartment on the south side of Chicago. The windows rattled, the pipes hummed, and Byron opened his eyes to the same ceiling he'd been staring at for 6 years. Cracked plaster, a water stain shaped like a hand reaching for something it couldn't touch. He didn't hit snooze. There was no time for that. The apartment was small enough to cross in 9 steps. A kitchenette with a hot plate and the mini fridge that buzzed louder than the train. A bathroom with a door that didn't close all the way. And in the corner, between the radiator and the window, an old upright piano. Beat up. 1 chipped key. Out of tune in 3 places. But it was his. Next to the piano, a hospital bed. And in it, his mother. Dorothy Bennett, 62, slept with an oxygen tube under her nose and a blood pressure cuff still strapped to her left arm from the night before. Byron checked both before he checked anything else. He adjusted her blanket, refilled her water glass, taped the day's pill schedule to the refrigerator like he did every Sunday. 7 pills, 4 times a day. He had the routine memorized the way some people memorize phone numbers. Byron kissed her forehead. She didn't wake up. She rarely did this early. He grabbed his bag, locked the door, and walked 12 minutes to the Red Line. The Whitfield Grand Hotel sat on Chicago's Gold Coast like a cathedral made of money. Marble floors, brass elevators, a lobby chandelier that cost more than every apartment on Byron's block combined. Byron entered through the service door on the south side, the one with no sign, the one guests never saw. His locker was in the basement. Number 19. The name patch on his gray uniform was half peeling. BYRNBNNETT. He'd asked maintenance to replace it twice. They never did. Nobody noticed. Nobody read janitor name tags. His shift started at 6 a.m. and ended whenever the last guest left. He mopped hallways, scrubbed bathroom tiles, emptied trash cans filled with champagne bottles that cost more than his weekly paycheck. He was invisible. That was the job. But every night, after the last event ended and the ballroom emptied, something changed. Byron would finish mopping the grand ballroom floor. He'd check the hallway, listen for footsteps, and when he was sure, completely sure, no one was coming, he would walk to the center of the room. The Steinway Model D sat on a low platform under 3 spotlights, black lacquer, polished every morning. A velvet cover draped over the keys like a blanket on a sleeping child. Byron would lift that cover. Slowly, the way you open something precious. He'd sit, adjust the bench, just a 1/4 inch back, the way he always liked it. And he'd play. Chopin, the Ballade No. 1 in G minor, just the opening passage, soft, almost a whisper. The sound would fill the empty room like smoke. It curled around the chandeliers. It touched the walls. It reached corners that daylight never did. 20 minutes. That's all he ever allowed himself. 20 stolen minutes after midnight. Then he'd stop, cover the piano, push his mop bucket to the supply closet, and leave through the same service door he came in. No one ever heard him play. No one ever knew. It wasn't always this way. Byron Bennett was a prodigy. Everyone on the South Side knew it. At 6, his mother put his fingers on the keys of the church piano at Greater Hope Baptist. By 9, he was playing every Sunday service. The congregation would go quiet. Not polite quiet, but the kind of quiet that means something holy just walked into the room. At 12, a youth orchestra director heard him at a community recital and offered him a spot immediately. At 17, he performed at the Chicago Cultural Center. A talent scout from Juilliard was in the 3rd row. The scholarship letter arrived 4 months later. Full ride. New York City. Dorothy cried for 2 hours straight. She ironed his one good shirt 3 times. She told everyone at church. She told the mailman. She told strangers at the grocery store. Byron was going to be someone. Then, 1 week before he was supposed to leave, Dorothy collapsed in the kitchen. A massive stroke. The ambulance came in 11 minutes. It felt like 11 hours. No insurance, no savings, no family to call. Byron was 18 years old, standing in a hospital hallway, holding a scholarship letter in one hand and a medical bill in the other. He chose the bill. Juilliard never heard from him. He never opened the acceptance letter again. He folded it into a square, put it in a shoebox under his bed, and got a job. 6 years ago. The piano at the Whitfield Grand was the only thing that kept that part of him breathing. It was Ray Dawson who found out first. Ray, 44, fellow janitor, built like a refrigerator with a laugh that bounced off walls. He'd forgotten his thermos one Tuesday night and came back to grab it from the supply closet. That's when he heard it. Music. Coming from the ballroom. At 12:30 a.m. Ray pushed the door open an inch. And there was Byron. Eyes closed, body swaying, fingers moving across the Steinway like water running downhill. The sound was so full, so real, that Ray didn't move for 3 straight minutes. When Byron stopped, Ray was still standing in the doorway. "How long you been hiding that?" Byron's hands froze on the keys. His face went tight. "Ray, don't." "Don't what? Don't tell you that was the most incredible thing I've ever heard in this building?" "Nah, man. How long?" Byron didn't answer. He covered the piano, grabbed his mop. Ray never pushed, but from that night on, every time Byron played after midnight, Ray stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching the corridor, making sure no one came. He never said a word about it to anyone. But one night, walking to the parking lot, Ray mentioned something. "You hear about this gala they're throwing next month? Whitfield Foundation. Biggest event of the year. Every rich person in Chicago is going to be in that room." Byron said nothing. Ray looked at him. "Whole city's going to be in there, man." Byron kept walking. He didn't know it yet, but that room, the same room where he played alone every night, was about to become the most important stage of his life. The night of the gala arrived like a curtain going up. The Whitfield Grand Hotel had been transformed. Ice sculptures lined the entrance. 2 eagles mid-flight, wings spread, melting so slowly they looked alive. A string quartet played Vivaldi near the coat check. The donor wall in the lobby listed one name in gold letters 3 times. Whitfield, Whitfield, Whitfield. Like a prayer to money. White roses on every table. Crystal glasses already filled. Waiters in black vests moving between guests like shadows. Trained to serve, trained to disappear. 400 guests. Tuxedos, floor-length gowns, diamonds catching light from chandeliers that hadn't been turned on full brightness since New Year's Eve. This was Garrett Whitfield's night, and everyone in the room knew it. Garrett didn't walk into the ballroom. He descended. Private elevator from the rooftop helipad. The doors opened, and he stepped out like a man entering a room he had built with his own name. Which, technically, he had. 58 years old, silver hair swept back tight, a charcoal bespoke suit that fit him like it had been stitched onto his body that afternoon. His watch alone, a Patek Philippe, cost more than Byron Bennett would earn in 3 years. He entered flanked by 2 assistants and his personal attorney. One assistant carried a leather folder. The other carried his phone, because Garrett Whitfield didn't carry his own phone. People didn't approach him. They waited to be approached. When he shook a hand, the other hand went to their shoulder, a grip, not a greeting, a reminder of who was standing above. He laughed loudly, always at his own observations. Nobody corrected him. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody even finished a sentence before he did. His daughter, Celeste Whitfield, 28, trailed a few steps behind. Blonde hair pinned up, a soft face that didn't match her father's edges. She smiled at the waiters. She said thank you when someone took her coat. Small things. But in that room, they stood out like whispers in a thunderstorm. Tonight was partly her engagement celebration. But the room didn't feel like it belonged to her. It belonged to him. Everything always did. And then there was the way Garrett treated the people who kept his world running. He didn't see them. That was the thing. It wasn't even cruelty. It was erasure. They existed the way furniture exists. Useful, replaceable, not worth remembering. He snapped his fingers at a bartender without looking up. Twice. He called Nina Castillo, the hotel's event coordinator, Natalie, 3 times. She corrected him each time. He never adjusted. A waiter, young kid, maybe 22, accidentally brushed Garrett's sleeve while setting down a bread plate. Barely touched him, the kind of contact that happens 100 times a night in a crowded room. Garrett stopped mid-sentence, looked at the waiter's hand, then looked at his face. Get someone competent. That was it. No yelling, no scene, just 5 syllables. The waiter was pulled from the floor before dessert. This was how power worked in Garrett Whitfield's world. Quiet, surgical, absolute. Backstage, Byron was doing what he always did, staying out of sight. He'd been assigned to keep the kitchen corridor clean. Spills, broken glass, whatever the catering team left behind. His mop bucket sat in the corner. His gray uniform blended into the concrete walls. At one point, Garrett walked past the service hallway on his way to the private restroom. Their eyes met. Half a second, maybe less. Garrett's gaze landed on Byron the way a gaze lands on a fire extinguisher. He registered the shape. He didn't register the person. Then he kept walking. Byron exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. But behind the scenes, something was going wrong. Trevor Ashworth, the classically trained pianist hired to perform tonight, was stuck. O'Hare International. A storm system over Lake Michigan had grounded every inbound flight since 6 p.m. His connecting flight from Boston never landed. Nina found out at 8:15. She called Ashworth twice, straight to voicemail. She checked the flight app. Delayed, canceled. Her stomach dropped. The live piano performance was listed on the program. Garrett had personally requested it. A Steinway Model D had been tuned that afternoon specifically for this moment. And the man who was supposed to play it was sitting in a terminal 400 miles away. Nina pressed her back against the kitchen wall and closed her eyes. She had to tell Garrett. And there was no version of that conversation that ended well. She straightened her blazer, took a breath, and walked toward the ballroom. What she didn't know yet, what no one knew, was that the person who would save this night was already in the building, pushing a mop bucket down a concrete hallway. The ballroom was peaking. Champagne was flowing on its third round. Laughter bounced between marble columns. A senator was telling a story about a yacht. Two tech founders were comparing watches. Somewhere near the back, a woman in a red dress was already drunk enough to knock over a centerpiece. Garrett Whitfield stood near the Steinway, arm draped over the lid like it was something he owned, which it was. He was 3 sentences into a toast about generosity, about giving back, about how the Whitfield Foundation believed in lifting people up. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Then a guest, older man, bow tie, loud voice, interrupted. "Garrett, when's the piano? It's on the program." Garrett smiled, the kind of smile that buys time. Patience. The best is always worth the wait. But behind the smile, his jaw was tight. He already knew. Nina had told him 8 minutes ago. Ashworth wasn't coming. The storm had swallowed the performance whole. Garrett had responded the way Garrett always responded to problems, with silence and a stare that made Nina's hands go cold. Now he was standing in front of 400 guests with a $200,000 piano and no one to play it. Backstage, Byron was stacking dishes. The kitchen was chaos, pans clanging, servers shouting orders, the smell of seared beef and butter thick in the air. Byron moved through it the way he always did, head down, hands busy, invisible. Ray appeared at his elbow, thermos in hand, voice low. "Ashworth's not coming, man. Storm killed his flight. They're losing it out there." Byron didn't look up. "Not my problem." "I know, I'm just saying." Ray took a sip from his thermos, let the silence do the work. Then he walked away. Byron kept stacking, but his hands had slowed down, just barely, just enough to notice. Nina was out of options. She'd called 4 pianists in the Chicago area. 1 didn't answer, 1 was in Milwaukee, 2 said they couldn't make it in under an hour. She was standing in the service corridor, phone in hand, heart pounding, when she saw Byron push his mop bucket past the kitchen door. Something flickered in her memory. 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday night, she'd come back to the hotel to grab a file she'd left in the ballroom office. It was almost 1 in the morning, and she'd heard something. Music, faint, coming from behind the ballroom doors. She'd pressed her ear to the door, listened for 10 seconds, then her phone rang and she left. She never found out who was playing. But right now, standing in a corridor with 0 options and a billionaire who is about to lose his mind, she took the shot. "Byron." He stopped, turned around, mop in hand. "This is going to sound crazy, but can you play piano? Even a little?" Byron's face didn't change. His grip on the mop tightened. He said nothing. "I heard someone playing in the ballroom a few weeks ago, late at night. Was that—" "Nina, don't." That was all he said. 2 words. But the way he said them, low, careful, like a man guarding a door he didn't want opened, told her everything. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the corridor like a blade. "You're asking the janitor to play my Steinway?" Garrett Whitfield, standing 10 feet away, arms crossed. His eyes moved from Nina to Byron the way a man looks at a stain on his carpet. Nina opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Garrett stepped closer. His shoes clicked on the concrete, every click louder than the last. "This man scrubs toilets for a living, and you want to put him on a stage in front of my guests." He wasn't asking, he was performing. 3 kitchen staff had stopped to watch. A waiter froze mid-step. The audience was already forming. Garrett tilted his head, looked Byron up and down, slowly, the way you inspect something you're about to throw away. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, amusement. The worst kind. The kind that sees a person and thinks, entertainment. He smiled. Actually, you know what? Let's do it. He turned and walked toward the ballroom, gestured for Byron to follow. Not an invitation, a summons. Come on, let's see what the help can do. Byron didn't move. His knuckles were white around the mop handle. His breath was steady, but his chest was tight. Ray was watching from the kitchen doorway. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said everything. The ballroom doors were open. The light spilled out like a dare. Byron stood at the edge of the ballroom. The light hit him like a wall. Warm, golden, blinding. The kind of light designed to make rich people look beautiful and everyone else look like they didn't belong. 400 faces turned toward him. Some curious, some amused. Most already forming the same thought. This is going to be embarrassing. Garrett was already at the center of the room, arms wide, voice booming. Ladies and gentlemen, change of plans tonight. Our pianist couldn't make it, but don't worry, we found a replacement. He gestured toward Byron, the way a ringmaster gestures toward the act. Our janitor here says he can play. Byron hadn't said that. He hadn't said anything, but it didn't matter. The story was already being written for him. Laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to fill the silence with something sharp. Celeste, sitting at the front table, looked at her father, then at Byron. Her smile was gone. Nina stood near the service door. Her hands were shaking. And Byron was somewhere else. The room went quiet in his head. Not silent, just far away. Like someone had turned the volume down on everything outside and turned it up on everything inside. He heard his mother's voice, not the way she sounded now, thin, tired, struggling for breath between sentences. The way she sounded when he was 6, strong, clear. Her hand on his back as he sat at the church piano for the first time, fingers too small to reach an octave. The piano doesn't know your uniform, baby. It only knows your hands. He heard the sound of the Juilliard letter sliding out of the envelope. He heard the ambulance siren from the night everything changed. He heard 6 years of silence. Every night he played alone in this room. Every morning he woke up before the sun. Every time someone looked through him like glass. He thought about what walking away meant. Safety. The same gray uniform tomorrow, the same locker, the same invisibility. He thought about what sitting down at that piano meant. Everything. Byron set the mop against the wall. The handle slipped, hit the marble floor. The crack echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. 400 people flinched. He didn't apologize. He didn't look at Garrett. He walked straight to the Steinway. His work boots squeaked on the polished floor, the only sound in the room. He sat down, adjusted the bench, a quarter-inch back. The small, precise movement of someone who has done this 1,000 times. He placed his hands above the keys, not touching them. Not yet. He closed his eyes. 5 seconds of silence. The longest 5 seconds that room had ever known. The first note came like a heartbeat. Low. Single. Alone. It rose from the bass end of the Steinway and floated into the ballroom like smoke from a candle just blown out. It didn't demand attention. It asked for it. Quietly. The way a man who has been silent for 6 years doesn't shout when he finally speaks. He whispers. Then the second note, a half step up. Tender, almost fragile. Then the third. Then the fourth. 4 notes, that's all it took. The woman in the second row, the one with the diamond choker and the champagne glass raised halfway to her lips, stopped. Her hand froze in midair. The glass never reached her mouth. A man near the back, mid-sentence about something that had seemed important 3 seconds ago, closed his mouth. He didn't finish the thought. He forgot what it was. A waiter standing in the doorway with a tray of creme brulee set the tray down on the nearest table. Not his table. He didn't care. He couldn't move. And Garrett Whitfield, standing exactly where Byron had left him, champagne still in hand, felt his smirk do something it had never done before. It died. Not slowly. Not gracefully. It cracked, like plaster on a ceiling that's been holding too long. His lips parted. His chin dropped 1/4 of an inch. His eyes, for the first time all evening, were not performing. He was watching. Because those 4 notes were not the notes of a janitor. They were not the notes of an amateur. They were not the notes of someone who plays a little or used to take lessons. They were the notes of someone who had lived inside this music for decades. Someone who had bled into these keys. Someone who had poured every silent year, every swallowed scream, every stolen midnight into the space between one note and the next. Chopin. Ballade No. 1 in G minor. One of the most demanding solo piano pieces ever written. And Byron Bennett was playing it like he wrote it. The first passage was slow. Deliberately slow. The melody unfolded the way a man unclenches his fists, one finger at a time. Byron's left hand trembled on the bass notes, not from nerves, from something deeper. The vulnerability of playing in front of people for the first time in 6 years. The vulnerability of being seen. His right hand carried the melody, gentle, aching, the kind of sound that makes you think of something you lost and never told anyone about. A door that closed. A phone call you didn't make. A letter you folded and put away. His shoulders were tight. His jaw was set. His breathing was shallow. He was fighting. Not the music. Himself. The part of him that had spent 6 years learning how to disappear was screaming at him to stop. Get up. Go back to the mop. Go back to the locker. Go back to being no one. But his hands kept moving, and somewhere around the 12th measure, something shifted. His shoulders dropped, not collapsed, released. Like a man who had been carrying something on his back for years and just realized he could set it down. His breathing deepened. His spine straightened. His chin lifted, just a fraction, but enough that the people in the front row could see his face change. This was no longer a dare. This was no longer a man proving something to a billionaire. This was a man coming home. The ballad moved into its second theme, the lyrical passage. The part Chopin wrote like a love letter to something already gone. Byron's right hand sang. There is no other word for it. The notes didn't just play. They spoke. They pleaded. They remembered. His left hand underneath was steady now, rock steady. A foundation as reliable as a heartbeat. The kind you don't notice until it stops. The melody rose. Cascading arpeggios, notes tumbling over each other like water over stones. Each one placed with a precision that made it sound effortless. But nothing about this was effortless. This was the product of 10,000 hours of practice, of a gift that refused to die no matter how hard the world tried to bury it. A woman in the 4th row, 60-something, pearls, the kind of face that doesn't show emotion in public, pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wet. A retired judge 3 tables back leaned forward in his chair. His hand was on his chest. Not dramatically, instinctively. The way your body reacts when something hits you somewhere medicine can't reach. A teenager near the bar, there as her parents +1, bored out of her mind 5 minutes ago, had her phone up, recording. Her jaw was open. She had forgotten she was filming. The string quartet hired for the evening had stopped pretending to organize their sheet music. They were standing in the corner, watching. The cellist had tears running down her face and didn't seem to notice. And in the kitchen corridor, Ray Dawson was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. He didn't wipe his eyes. He didn't have to pretend here. Nobody was looking at him. Everyone was looking at Byron. The ballade entered its storm. The middle section. Presto con fuoco, Chopin's Eruption. The part where the love letter catches fire and the grief underneath stops hiding. Byron's hands became a blur, the right hand racing up the keyboard, arpeggios so fast they blurred into a single ribbon of sound. The left hand crashing into octaves that shook the low end of the piano like thunder rolling across Lake Michigan. The sound changed. It was no longer intimate. It was immense, orchestral. It filled every corner of the ballroom, bounced off the marble floors, rattled the crystal glasses, made the chandelier tremble so slightly that only the people directly underneath noticed. The velocity was staggering, notes pouring out faster than anyone in the room could track, but not a single one was wasted. Not a single one was wrong. Every note was exactly where Chopin put it, and exactly where Byron needed it to be. A man at the donor table grabbed his wife's arm. She grabbed it back. Neither of them noticed. A socialite in the fifth row whispered to no one in particular, "Where did he come from?" Nobody answered. Nobody had an answer. And then, right at the peak, Byron did something that only a master would dare. He stopped. Not completely. The ballad has a passage right before its climactic explosion, a ritardando, a deliberate slowing. 4 measures where Chopin pulls the reins and makes you wait. Byron stretched it. He took those 4 measures and turned them into an eternity, each note slower than the last, the space between them growing wider, wider, until the silence between the notes became louder than the notes themselves. The room held its breath. Literally. 400 people stopped breathing at the same time. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. You could hear the fabric of someone's suit shifting as they leaned forward. You could hear your own heartbeat. A woman in the back row whispered, "Oh my God." She didn't mean to say it out loud. She couldn't help it. Then the storm broke. Byron's hands crashed into the fortissimo passage with a force that sent a shockwave through the room. The sound hit the marble walls and came back, doubled, tripled. It was enormous. It was violent. It was beautiful in the way that lightning is beautiful. Terrifying and perfect and completely beyond control. His body was moving now, not performing, channeling. His torso swayed with the phrases. His foot on the sustain pedal was surgical, pressing and releasing with a precision that let every note ring exactly as long as it needed to, and not a millisecond more. The bass notes rumbled like something underground waking up. The treble notes screamed like something finally set free. This wasn't a performance. This was a confession. 6 years of silence. 6 years of swallowed pride. 6 years of mopping floors 10 feet from a piano that was calling his name every single night. All of it, every second, was pouring out of his hands and into the room. And the room couldn't take it. People were standing now. Not in ovation. Not yet. Just standing. Because their bodies wouldn't let them sit anymore. The music had gotten inside them. It was in their chests, in their throats, in the places they kept things they didn't talk about. Then, the coda, the final passage. The storm pulled back, the thunder faded, and what was left was something small, something unbearably tender. Byron slowed. Each note now was deliberate, careful, like the last words of a conversation you know you'll never have again. The cascading descent, from fortissimo to pianissimo, from a roar to a whisper, from everything to almost nothing. His right hand carried the final melody, 4 notes, the same 4 notes that opened the piece, but different now, heavier. They carried the weight of everything that had come before. The final chord. Byron pressed it, held the sustain pedal. The sound filled the room. Not loud, not soft. Just present, like the last breath of someone who has finally said everything they needed to say. The chord decayed. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. 10 seconds. The chandeliers were still. Nobody moved. Byron lifted his hands from the keys, slowly. He placed them in his lap. His eyes were still closed. His chest was rising and falling. His face was wet. The silence. Not the silence of an empty room. The silence of 400 people who had forgotten they had hands, forgotten they had voices, forgotten everything except what they had just heard. 2 full seconds of absolute nothing. Then, one man stood, 3rd row, white hair, 70 years old. Professor Edwin Holloway, retired concert pianist, a man who had performed at Carnegie Hall, the Vienna Musikverein, and the Royal Albert Hall. He rose slowly, deliberately, the way a man stands when he wants the room to understand that this is not politeness. He began to clap. 1 clap, 2, 3, measured, steady, the clap of a man who knew, with absolute certainty, what he had just witnessed. The woman next to him stood, then the man behind her, then a whole table, then another. The room erupted. The applause didn't build, it detonated. 400 people on their feet. Not the polite, rhythmic clapping that follows a dinner speech. This was something raw. Hands slamming together like they were trying to break something open. Like the sound itself was a kind of justice. Someone shouted, "Encore!" from the back of the room. Then another voice. Then 3 more. A woman near the front, mid-60s, pearls, the kind of woman who hadn't cried in public since her daughter's wedding, was sobbing openly. She didn't bother wiping her face. She didn't care who saw. The teenager with the phone was still recording. Her hands were shaking so badly the footage would be blurry for the first 10 seconds. It didn't matter. The audio was enough. That audio would be on the internet within the hour. It would reach 2 million people within the week. Nina Castillo was standing by the service entrance, mascara running down both cheeks. She was laughing and crying at the same time, the kind of sound that comes out of you when something you hoped for actually happens, and you don't know what to do with the feeling. And Celeste Whitfield, Garrett's daughter, pushed through the crowd. She didn't walk. She moved the way someone moves when they can't wait any longer. Past the tables, past the guests, past her father. She reached the piano. Byron was still sitting, hands in his lap, eyes open now, dazed, like a man surfacing from deep water. Celeste took his hand, both of hers wrapped around his. She didn't care about the calluses. She didn't care about the gray uniform. She leaned in close enough for the nearest tables to hear and said, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in this room." Her voice cracked on the last word. She meant it. Everyone who heard it knew she meant it. And then there was Garrett. He hadn't moved. Not one step. He was standing exactly where he'd been when Byron sat down. Center of the room, slightly left of the piano. His champagne glass was still in his hand. The champagne was warm. He hadn't taken a sip in 9 minutes. His face was the color of old paper. The room had shifted around him like a tide pulling away from shore. The guests who were laughing at his joke 10 minutes ago, the ones who had roared when he flicked that $50 bill, were now looking at him with something he had never seen directed at himself before. Not anger, not hatred, something worse. Pity. He was, for the first time in his adult life, the smallest person in the room. Not the richest, not the loudest, not the most powerful. The smallest. He tried to recover. He started clapping. Late. Too late. The rhythm was off. It landed the way a lie lands when everyone already knows the truth. Hollow. Obvious. Embarrassing. He set the champagne down on the nearest table, straightened his jacket, and quietly, without a word to anyone, without a glance at his daughter, walked toward the private elevator corridor. No one watched him leave. No one noticed. For the first time in the history of his own hotel, Garrett Whitfield exited a room, and the room did not care. The applause was still going when Professor Edwin Holloway approached the piano. The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. Many guests recognized him. Some had seen him perform. Some had his recordings on their shelves at home. He stood in front of Byron, looked at him the way a man looks at something he thought he'd never see again. A long moment, unhurried. Then he spoke, loud enough for the room. "Son, I've heard that Ballad performed at Carnegie Hall twice. You just gave the third best performance." He paused, let it hang. "The other two were mine." The room broke into laughter, warm laughter, the kind that comes after tension snaps, the kind that means we're all okay now. A guest near the front, a man in a gray suit, smiling, called out, "How does a janitor learn to play like that?" Byron stood, slowly. He looked out at the room, 400 faces looking back at him, not through him, at him, for the first time. He said, "A janitor didn't learn to play. A pianist learned to clean." The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet. The other kind. The kind where something lands so perfectly that silence is the only response big enough to hold it. Then the applause came back, louder than before. The applause eventually faded, the way all applause does, but what replaced it was something rarer. People wanted to talk to Byron Bennett, not at him, not about him, to him. It started with a woman in a green gown who had been sitting at the donor table. She walked straight to the piano, extended her hand, and introduced herself like Byron was the most important person she'd met that year. Then a man in a navy suit, then another, then a small crowd formed, not the kind that gathers around a spectacle, but the kind that gathers around a person they've just realized they've been underestimating. Business cards were pressed into Byron's palm. He didn't have pockets that weren't full of cleaning rags, so he held them in his left hand like a small deck of cards. A corporate attorney mentioned the Chicago Symphony's community outreach program. A tech executive asked if he'd ever considered recording. And then, a woman in her 70s, quiet, no jewelry, no fuss, touched Byron's arm and said, "My husband was a doctor. He passed last year. But he spent 20 years working with stroke patients at Northwestern. I know a specialist in Milwaukee, Dr. Reinhardt. He's the best." Byron's jaw tightened. "The consultation is $4,800. I'd like to cover it. No strings." Byron opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I heard you play. That's enough." She squeezed his arm once. Then she walked away. No business card, no last name. Just a promise and a phone number written on a cocktail napkin. Byron stared at the napkin for a long time. The ink was slightly smudged. The handwriting was steady. $4,800. The exact amount he'd been trying to save for 2 years. Sitting in his hand, written in blue ink on a square of white paper. Professor Holloway found him 10 minutes later. The crowd had thinned around the piano. Most guests had returned to their tables. Dessert was being served. The string quartet had resumed, but quieter now, as if even they knew the room had changed, and there was no point competing with what had just happened. Holloway pulled a chair next to the piano bench and sat down. He didn't rush. He crossed one leg over the other and looked at the Steinway the way an old friend looks at a house they used to live in. How old were you when you started? 6. Who taught you? My mother. Then a teacher at Greater Hope Baptist on the south side. Then nobody. Then the piano taught me. Holloway nodded. Like that answer made perfect sense. I'm curating a benefit concert at Orchestra Hall. Spring. 6 performers. I need a closing act. Byron looked at him, waited for the catch, the condition, the part where someone explains why it won't actually work. Holloway just raised an eyebrow. You interested or not? Byron's voice cracked when he answered, just barely. A fracture so small only someone sitting 2 feet away would catch it. Yes, sir. Holloway stood, buttoned his jacket, looked at Byron one more time. Don't call me sir. Call me Edwin. And learn the ballad number 4. It's harder. You'll love it. He walked away without looking back, the way people walk when the conversation is finished and there's nothing left to add. Ray found Byron in the kitchen corridor 20 minutes later. Byron was sitting on an overturned milk crate, still in his gray uniform, the business cards fanned out in one hand, the cocktail napkin in the other. His eyes were red, but his face was calm. Ray didn't say anything. He just walked over and hugged him. Not the short kind, the kind where one man grabs another man's shoulders and holds on, and neither of them says a word, because words would ruin it. When Ray stepped back, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and laughed. You know I gotta find a new piano bodyguard now, right? Who's gonna watch the hallway for you? Byron laughed, the first real laugh in a long time. Later that night, past midnight, the gala was over, the ballroom was empty, the caterers were gone. The chandeliers had dimmed to their automatic low setting. Byron sat on the bench outside the hotel's service entrance. The city was quiet. A siren somewhere far west. The hum of Lakeshore Drive. The smell of rain coming off the lake. He pulled out his phone and called his mother. She picked up on the first ring. She always waited up. Baby? Mama, I played tonight. Silence on the other end. 3 seconds. 4. Then a sound, small, broken, beautiful. The sound of a woman who had been waiting 6 years to hear those words. I know, baby. Ray held up the phone. I heard every note. Byron pressed his forehead to his knees. And he wept. Not from sadness, not from relief, from something that doesn't have a name. The feeling of 6 years of silence, finally breaking open. Dorothy's voice came through the phone, thin, shaking, but clear. I heard you, baby. I heard every note. The video from that night hit the internet the next morning. The teenager's footage, shaky, blurry for the first 10 seconds, audio slightly distorted from the Steinway's bass notes overwhelming her phone's microphone, was posted on social media at 7:14 a.m. with a 5-word caption. Billionaire dares janitor to play piano. By noon, 400,000 views. By Friday, 2.3 million. By the following Monday, news outlets were calling the hotel A Juilliard faculty member in New York watched the clip 3 times on a Tuesday morning, closed her laptop, and made a phone call she hadn't planned on making that day. Professor Holloway's spring benefit concert at Orchestra Hall sold out in 9 days. 6 performers on the program. Byron's name was listed last. Closing act. The spot you don't give to someone who's good. You give it to someone who makes the audience forget to check their phone for 2 hours. The specialist in Milwaukee, Dr. Reinhardt, agreed to see Dorothy the following month. He reviewed her scans, he ran new tests, and for the first time in 6 years, one word appeared in her medical file that hadn't been there before. Hopeful. Byron called his mother from the hospital parking lot. She could hear him smiling through the phone. She hadn't heard that sound in a long time. And Garrett Whitfield? He wasn't destroyed. That would be too clean, and real life doesn't work like that. But something changed. Small things. He stopped snapping his fingers at the bartenders. He learned Nina Castillo's name, her real name, and used it. 3 weeks after the gala, he donated $50,000 to the hotel employees' education fund. No press release, no photo op, just a wire transfer and a one-line memo. For the staff. Whether it was guilt or strategy, no one could say for certain, but the money was real. And sometimes that's where change begins, not with the heart, but with the hand that finally opens. Byron didn't quit the next day. He finished his shifts through the end of the month. Same gray uniform, same locker, same mop bucket with the squeaky wheel. He showed up early. He left late. He did the job the way he'd always done it. Quietly, completely, without complaint. But on his last night, after his final shift, he walked into the empty ballroom one more time. The chandeliers were on their dim setting. The chairs were stacked. The room smelled like floor polish and silence. Byron uncovered the Steinway, sat down, adjusted the bench a 1/4 inch back, closed his eyes. He played the opening 4 notes of the ballade. Just 4, nothing more. The sound floated through the empty room the way it always had, touching the walls, curling around the chandeliers, reaching corners that daylight never did. Then he stopped, covered the piano, pushed the bench back in, placed his uniform, folded, clean, on top of the velvet cover, and walked out the service entrance into the Chicago night. The air smelled like rain off the lake. The city hummed. Somewhere on Michigan Avenue, a cab honked. Somewhere on the south side, a woman in a hospital bed was sleeping with a phone still warm in her hand. Byron Bennett didn't look back. He didn't need to. The room behind him was empty, but the road ahead of him was not. Talent doesn't expire. It doesn't rot in a locker room. It doesn't dissolve in a mop bucket. It doesn't care about your zip code, your uniform, or the number of zeros in your bank account. It waits, quietly, patiently, the way a piano waits under a velvet cover in a dark room at midnight. Not dying, just sleeping. Waiting for the moment someone has the courage to sit down, lift the cover, and play. Byron waited 6 years. Maybe you've been waiting longer. Maybe you set something down a long time ago, a dream, a skill, a part of yourself, and told yourself it was the practical thing to do, the responsible thing, the adult thing. And maybe it's still there, under the cover, in the dark, waiting. The only question is, when do you sit down? If Byron's story moved you, even a fraction of how it moved that room, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every single week. Stories of people the world wrote off. People who played their way back in. Next week, a homeless veteran walks into a courtroom and delivers a closing argument that no lawyer in the room saw coming. You don't want to miss it. Now here's my question, and I want a real answer in the comments. What's the talent or dream you set aside because life told you to be practical? How long has it been waiting? Hashtag talent has no uniform. Hashtag justice for Byron. Hashtag never judge a book.
For notes that already took for 400 people to stop reading and 1 billionaire to stop smiling. Byron didn't sit down to prove anyone wrong. He sat down because after 6 years of being invisible, he was tired of being quiet. Someone asked, how does a janitor play like that? He said, a janitor didn't learn to play, a pianist learned to clean. The world learned to define you by your uniform, by what you do to survive. But who you are doesn't disappear just because no one's watching. Byron played alone in that room every night for 6 years. The gift was always there. It was the wedding. But here's what haunts me. What if he never sat down that night? How many of us already made that choice? How many pianists are sitting in the dark right now because we told ourselves it was too late? Tell me in the comments, what did you put away? Share this with someone who needs it. Hit subscribe. Next week, a homeless veteran delivered a closing argument. No lawyers saw coming. Talent doesn't inspire. It's a great for courage.